What's up guys, Zero Skater here, and today I'm going to walk you through how to create your own killer MegaMan TCG deck list.
If you're a fan of the channel, consider supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $1 per month, you can help me continue to bring you premier, unmatched content. Unlock exclusive rewards by becoming a patron today.
Okay, so I've already done an introduction video for the MegaMan TCG where I walked you guys through how to play the game and what it's all about, and then some different options for playing if you want to jump in online and get involved yourselves. But you might be wondering, well, where do I start, right? And you gotta get a deck to play before you start playing, of course. So we're gonna talk all about deck building today and some tips and tricks that go along with that, because when you're a beginner, it might seem a little bit overwhelming. And you have a couple of options because you can net deck, which is just copying somebody else's deck list from online and play with that. And I think that's honestly a good way to get into the game, to get a feel for how the game flows without having that daunting task of creating your own deck. But if you think you're ready to create your own deck, or you want to just say, well, whatever, I'm going to just try it out anyways and see how it goes, I would recommend you do that as well, because it is a lot of fun. It's a great creative process to come up with an idea on paper and then test it out and refine it and really turn it into something functional that does well in game. And it's super rewarding when you finally get something that works. So we're going to go over some deck building tips and tricks, and I hope you guys are ready for them. But as always, be sure to blast that like button if you enjoy the video, and subscribe for more Zero Skater content. And with that said, let's jump on over and check out some deck building tips and tricks.
Alright, so here we are on battle-network.com, and let's go ahead and talk about, well, where do you start, right? So come over to the cards tab, and I think the first thing you want to do is you have to pick a NetNavi, because the NetNavi is going to be the basis of your entire deck. So if you come over to the card types, you can choose NetNavi, and these are all the available NetNavis in the game. So, except this guy right here, the MegaMan Net City Defender, he's banned. I don't know if he was ever actually officially released, but I know they had planned for him at the very least, but don't ignore this thing. And then you have MegaMan X, which was like a promotional card, so he doesn't have any actual Navi emblem cards that go along with him, so he's just inherently weaker than everybody else because he has a smaller card pool and no effect either to capitalize off of. But anyways, take a look at the Navis, right? Pick a guy that you think looks cool, or read the effects, because some of them have effects, like Electman here. It says whenever you play a battle chip, you may power up twice. Or Gutsman, whenever you play a battle chip, your Gutsman is strength +1. Or one of my favorites is Airman, so whenever you play a battle chip, you may return up to 2 resources to their owner's hands. So that's a lot of disruption built in there. So there's some Navis with some really cool effects, and you want to take a look at both the effects and the stat lines, because some Navis without effects are still really unique and have cool stat lines, like Pharaohman here, who is overstatted at the cost of having a worse blast value, because normally 222 is like the average stat line across the board, like MegaMan and Torchman here. And then you see up and down 1 point, like Snakeman is -1 strength, but he's +1 defense to make up for it. But like this Pharaohman is overstatted because he's a 3-2. So you bump up your strength and you don't even lose any defense, which is awesome, but you make up for it in your blast value because you have to burn 4 power in order to blast instead of 2, like a lot of these other guys. And oftentimes also the effects come at a stat cost as well, because if you look at somebody like Airman, for example, he's down 1 strength and he's also up 1 blast, which is kind of detrimental, but he's got an amazing effect to make up for it. So you got to look at the NetNavi options and pick who you think looks fun or looks cool. But after you think you've chosen a Navi, or even before, I would also recommend checking out the emblem cards. So if you take a look at emblem cards here, you can sort by all the different Navis. So if we click Electman here, you can see all the specific cards that only Electman can play. And so you want to take a look through these Navi cards. And sometimes if you find a Navi, even if they don't have an effect or interesting stats, they might have really cool Navi cards that you like. Torchman, for example, I like his Navi cards a lot because he's got a lot of really good red burn damage. Like this one, burn a power to make your opponent lose 2 energy. Or whenever you play another Torchman card, you can make your opponent lose an energy. So that's a bunch of free burn right there with the net op. And a net op stays in play until it's removed or destroyed by an effect. Otherwise, it provides continuous value throughout the game, which is really good. So every NetNavi pretty much has a net op. They have usually 2 different colors. So in Torchman's case, it's blue and red. Or if you look at, let's see, MegaMan, he is green and blue. And so every Navi has their net op, they have their battle chip, which is a unique chip specific to them, and then they have a handful of different cards, resources, and events, different combinations of 2 different base colors. So that is the main thing. First, look through all of the different net Navis and the different emblem cards that go along with those Navis, and find one that you really like the sound of, and that will be the basis of your deck moving forward. So after you've found your Navi, let's go ahead and move on to some of the next big things, which are going to be, in general, your main strategy with that Navi. So when you're trying to come up with your deck's general strategy, you need to first consider colors. So if we're looking at MegaMan here, and you look at his battle chip, Invisible, it requires 2 blues in order to play this. So you can also see that he has 3 blue resources available that are specific to him. And he also has some greens, but if you look at the greens, they don't necessarily require anything green in order to play, they just require MegaMan cards. So Invisible, if you're going to want to make use of that battle chip, you're going to have to play a lot of blue cards, which gears MegaMan naturally towards a blue deck. So that's always something to consider, is look at the emblem cards and see what colors that you need to be playing in order to utilize those cards. And that might help give you a starting point towards what type of deck you want to build. So if we want to look at the different colors, let's get off of the MegaMan sorting here and we'll go to blue. So blue is basically focused on control and disruption. So you can see cards like Cancel, discard a card to cancel a battle chip, or Fish on the Brain, discard a card to cancel a Blast Destiny. So that's canceling what your opponent is trying to do. Or it has a lot of powerful discard effects as well. If you look at something like Correction, where the opponent discards down to 1 card, that's a really strong effect, but of course it requires 3 blue resources in order to put into play. So you probably have to be playing a mono blue deck, which is pretty much all blue cards, in order to play something like Correction reliably. Because you don't want to end up having cards in hand that are stuck as dead cards because you can't fulfill their requirements. So you have to focus your deck building around these cards. So blue is all focused on disruption. Then if we look at green, green is focused on drawing cards mainly, as well as searching cards from both deck and discard pile, and then other niche things like recharging or making your opponent draw. But green is like the plentiful color where you just get to get a bunch of cards and you get to find what you need when you need it. So green is great with that, but it doesn't have a lot of disruption in it, and it also doesn't have a lot of offensive power. So then if you look at a color like yellow, yellow is incredibly fast. It's very disruptive as well because you have a lot of effects that focus on powering up or burning your opponent's power. So either you're accelerating your power or you're hindering your opponent's. And you have some resource destruction as well, which is very disruptive because you need resources as key cards to trigger, fulfill the requirements to play other powerful cards. So resource destruction is really good, and yellow is just great at being aggressive and also controlling, depending on which side of the yellow you want to go with. And then red is mainly just focused on pure damage. So a lot of burn cards are red, which just make your opponent straight up lose energy, which bypasses any defense values they might have or any canceling they might have because you don't revert anything that's done. So once burn damage happens, your opponent loses the energy, and that's that. So red is also good at modifying Blast Destinies, which converts then to damage. So like Impressive Battlers just adds 4 to your Blast Destiny, right? So red is very much just pure stat buffs, oftentimes, or pure damage. But again, doesn't have any disruption. So when you're considering your colors, think about, well, what's my goal, right? In the case of MegaMan, as we talked about, he probably wants to go blue. So he's probably going to be a disruptive deck. Now, after you decide on what colors you want to go with, you then have to think about a play style. So am I going to play blue Magic Man as a reactive cancellation type deck with a lot of cancel cards? Or am I going to play it more of a discard style deck where I'm going to utilize things like the correction card that we saw and make them discard their cards? If you look back at his specific emblem cards, you're going to see his ability says whenever you play a battle chip, your Magic Man is blast -2. And his invisible chip just makes your strength +4, and then it puts this beneath the deck. So it's a pretty strong battle chip with very low requirements and a high blast destiny as well, which would play perfectly into Magic Man's ability, which is whenever you play the battle chip, your blast is -2, so it puts you at a 2-2-1 stat line. And 2-2-1 is incredibly strong because you have average strength and defense and an above average blast value because you're only burning 1 power in order to blast. So if you can battle chip and blast every turn, or at least frequently, that's going to be a lot of damage that you're going to be dishing out with Magic Man, because battle chips are damage, blasting is additional damage, and you're able to do it every turn because as long as you have the battle chip, of course, you're powering up at the start of each turn. So with blasting a 1, you can just keep on the damage there. So you can plan your general strategy with Magic Man to be a battle chip blast deck, but you can also change up your blue strategy towards more discard oriented or cancellation oriented or whatever you want to do. So you want to look at your colors, you want to look at your general game plan within those colors, and also some Navis, they don't even care about playing their emblem cards. So don't think that you have to be locked into a Navi's base colors, because sometimes when you think outside the box, you might find something works better than what their natural cards are geared towards. Some Navis, like Elecman, I think is a great example. I mean, you might look at his cards and they're fine, I guess, but his ability is really where he shines, and he can make so much more out of that ability with other colors. Like red is a great color for Elecman because with some of the crazy red cards, you're able to get insane recharge ability, even though you're understated and you're going to be taking a lot of damage. If you look at a red card like, it's called Unbelievable, it's an event that takes 3 reds, but then you put every battle chip from your discard pile on top of your deck. So Elecman already wants to play a lot of battle chips because they play into his ability, because every time you play the battle chip, you get to power up twice in Elecman. So this red card plays great into him. And so a lot of times, don't be afraid to think outside the box and divert your color strategy into different colors rather than what the Navi inherently tells you to do, right? Because that's not always the best. So don't be afraid to think outside the box and come up with different strategies even that aren't maybe focused on colors, but are more so focused on just a certain board state or a certain game plan that you're trying to execute consistently. And yeah, it's just colors aren't everything, and the Navi's emblem cards give you a good starting point, but once you get more familiar with the game, don't be afraid to branch out into other things that might not seem very typical of that Navi. So after you've got a main strategy in mind, you need to refine your deck list, right? So what are you actually going to be adding into your deck? And so you got to pay attention to your deck's stats. And one thing I would recommend as a good baseline is to start by having half of your deck resources. So roughly half. Some decks use a little less, some decks use a little more. But if you have about half your deck as resources, you should have a pretty easy time fulfilling the requirements in order to play other cards like your battle chips. So if we're looking at Magic Man, I mean, he needs 2 blues for his invisible chip, right? So you want to be playing a good amount of blues, and half of your deck should be resources. So you're looking at about 30 cards, right, for half the deck, because you're playing with a 60 card deck, including the Navi, so 59 actual cards that you're adding to your deck. Now, not only do you want to have half resources, and then the other half can be a combination of events or battle chips. So keep in mind that you can only play 1 battle chip per turn. So if you had literally half the deck battle chips, half the deck resources, well, you're going to have a lot of times where you are overloaded with battle chips and you can't really play them because it's a limit of 1 per turn. So resources, you can put 4 down onto the board at a time. So that doesn't happen nearly as much with resources, so it's okay to have so many. So I'd recommend splitting that other half of the deck between events and battle chips, because events you can play as many as you want in a turn, and battle chips are the once per turn. So I think somewhere between maybe 10 to 15 battle chips on average. Some decks only maybe play 8 battle chips or less even. So a little bit more events than battle chips is what I would recommend, because events just don't have that natural limit. So also you need to pay attention to your power and your requirements for these cards that you're putting into your deck. So when looking at Invisible, if you're centering the deck focus around this card and similar cards, well, it doesn't require any power. It just requires the 2 blues. And if you look at his blue resources, the MegaMan resources, all of them also don't require any power. You can just put them down on the board as we call free-to-play resources, because there's no requirement other than, of course, the MegaMan deck, but you wouldn't play these in any other deck. So they're free-to-play resources. So all of that stuff can be played at very low power thresholds, except for a card like Mind Tricks. So if you want to include a card like Mind Tricks in your deck, you're going to have to alter your game plan a little bit. The way you pilot the deck in-game, you're going to want to hover around that 4 power mark, because if you're not, and you're just going really aggressive and burning your power for effects or blasting all the time, and not waiting and letting yourself build up to that 4 power threshold, then you might draw into Mind Tricks and it'll be a dead card, which is really bad. I mean, you don't want to have dead cards as much as you can avoid it, or else your deck isn't functioning smoothly. So if you include Mind Tricks, just keep in mind that you're going to have to play around that 4 power threshold, which maybe you're okay with. And if so, fine, go ahead and put it in the deck, and maybe you can add some other higher power requirement cards. But if you don't want to do that, and you want to focus more on playing at a low power threshold, then you got to keep that in mind when looking at your resources and other cards to play. So if we take a look at the blues, if we're trying to build a low power threshold MegaMan with blues, then you're going to want to look at stuff like, I don't know, Great Surprise is a free-to-play blue, or one of the best free-to-play blues is Dogged Determination, because you get to discard a blue card to cancel a battle chip, so that can be a potentially really powerful effect. For a free-to-play card, that's pretty dang good. So just keep your power requirements in mind when you're deck building. Also your emblem requirements, right? So if we go back to MegaMan again, I know I keep using him as an example, but I think it's easier to follow if we kind of focus on one guy. So Wheel of Magic doesn't take any power, but you do have to burn 2 power in order to do this, to activate the card, but then you get to take any 2 cards from your deck into your hand and then shuffle your deck. So it's a double search from the deck, which is super powerful, but you got to burn the 2 power to activate it, so you're going to have to keep that in mind when you're playing the deck. And it also takes 3 MegaMan emblems. So the Navi counts as an emblem inherently, but you need 2 other MegaMan resources in play in order to play Wheel of Magic. So that incentivizes you even further to play these blue resources, because they're MegaMan cards, and that will fulfill the requirements for Wheel of Magic. If you wanted to play a blue MegaMan deck without these ones because you didn't like them for whatever reason, you're free to do that, and you can still play Invisible in a deck that doesn't play the MegaMan resources. But then you wouldn't be able to play something like Wheel of Magic, or at least not consistently, depending on the number of each of these resources you include in your deck. So the requirements and the stats of your deck are very important for having it flow and work properly, because you might have a good idea, but your numbers and your stats might be off, and it's just not going to work the way you intended. But with some testing and modifications of the numbers, you can often find the sweet spot where your deck will function and flow as you intended. So it just takes some trial and error, but you'll get it there. So just keep working on it. But again, keep in mind, rough number, half your deck as resources, and then the other half a combination of events and battle chips. And if you follow those general guidelines, I think you'll have a somewhat functional deck, as long as your colors are focused and you're paying attention to your power requirements, as well as any other color or emblem requirements that you may have. So once you have your main goal or your general strategy of the deck figured out, and you know what kind of cards you want to play, well, you need to focus on consistency, because consistency is key. If you are stuck with dead cards in your hand and you're just kind of waiting around for the stars to align, well, then you're giving your opponent time to either disrupt your board state and make things even harder to get going, or maybe they're outpacing you in damage and they're just going to get too far ahead that you can't catch up. So you need to be consistent in executing whatever your game plan is. So when thinking about consistency, focus first and foremost on your deck's main goal. So make your deck's engine run before you focus on anything else with the deck. So in the case of MegaMan, if we're trying to battle chip blast consistently, well, we need to make sure we have enough battle chips included in the deck in order to consistently see a battle chip in our opening hand or any subsequent draws. And we also need to focus on having enough resources to fulfill those requirements. And so you can play 4 copies max of any card in your deck. So we probably want to be maxing out on copies of Invisible because it's such a crucial card in the strategy. And then cards like, you know, the blue MegaMan resources like Odds Are Against You and the Magic Block and the Yahoo, you can max out on copies so that you see them more often, right? So there's other room for tech cards in the deck, and tech cards are like cards that don't lend themselves towards the engine but give you more versatility in other situations. But before you start including techs, make sure your engine runs. So if we look at another deck that I really like is SnakeMan. So to me, SnakeMan's engine runs based on his NetOp, Miss Millionaire, because it says your SnakeMan is strength +1 for each of your other SnakeMan cards in play. So you passively increase your strength turn after turn. It doesn't keep building, but let's say you have SnakeMan, Miss Millionaire, and then keep battling all in play. Well, that's 2 other SnakeMan cards, and so your passive stat line is a 3-3-2, which is incredibly overstated as long as you have Miss Millionaire buffing it. So that's going to be a lot of extra damage just automatically throughout the course of the game, and that is the core of the SnakeMan engine. So you want to find Miss Millionaire first and foremost before you focus on anything else that you might want the deck to do. So how do you find the NetOp? How do you make your engine run? Well, if you take a look at some of the green cards, again, green has a lot of searchability. So cards like That's Too Easy, take any card from your deck into hand and shuffle your deck. So it requires 3 power and 2 greens. So you need a lot of easy play green resources to fulfill requirements. And you also got to wait till 3 power. But one of my favorite cards is Playing Hooky. So you discard 2 cards to take any card from your deck into hand, and then you shuffle your deck. And this can be played on turn 2 because it's a 2 power requirement. So you put it down in play on 2, you spend it right away, discard 2 junk cards from your hand, you search Miss Millionaire, and you're ready to put her into play on turn 3, which is the perfect timing, seeing as she costs 3 power in order to play. So that gets your engine going. So I focus in SnakeMan on getting that first and foremost, and then I have a lot of other cards that I tech into the deck for different situations. And so as you can see now in MegaMan, we had the example of make sure you play enough battle chips and blue resources for the requirements. In SnakeMan, make sure you get Miss Millionaire, find it as soon as possible in order to get it in play and start reaping the benefits of that passive strength buff. So find your general strategy, make your deck's engine run, and then once you've done that, then we can talk a bit about versatility. So what makes a deck versatile? Well, it's the ability to divert from that main game plan in order to fit certain situations that you might come up against based on whatever Navi your opponent is playing. So once you have your numbers worked out and you are consistently seeing the necessary resources for MegaMan and you're consistently seeing enough battle chips that allow you to battle chip blast enough times as you would like, well, then you can fill the rest of the deck up with tech cards. So tech cards are just a card that doesn't go towards your deck's engine, but it gives you options to fit certain situations that you might run into. So a good example of a tech card would be, let's look at blue for MegaMan. Well, not for MegaMan, but blue in general. So I think Grave Problem is a great tech card for MegaMan. So the opponent takes all cards in his or her power gauge into their hand, and all it takes is 2 blues, and there's no power requirement, so that's great, right? Now, this doesn't help him blast or find or play battle chips and push damage, but it slows the opponent down by making them grab their power gauge into their hand, and that can be a huge setback. So it's very disruptive. It's a great tech card. Another one here, Like Father, Like Son, same thing, return up to 3 resources to their owner's hands. So let's say your opponent builds up to 4 power because that's their threshold they're looking for. They put down some crucial resources into play, and then they're like, okay, well, I have them into play, so now I can start blasting and burning my power for other effects because I'll just spend my resources when I want to. But they go ahead and blast, so now they have less than 4 power, and now you play Like Father, Like Son, and you bounce the resources back to hand, and now they're sitting with dead cards in their hand yet again because they've burned away their power. So that's a great tech card for certain situations. And these cards, as you can see, they don't contribute towards Magic Man's main engine, but they're still really strong cards. So focus on the engine. Once you have the engine running, like that skeleton of the engine might only take up 40 cards out of your 60 card deck, and that leaves you with 1/3 of the deck left for techs. So when you're talking about tech cards though, you also still need to consider consistency. So is this a really good tech that works into a wide variety of opponents' decks where I would want to see this pretty much every game? And if the answer is yes, well, you probably want to max out on the copies of that tech card. Because if it's always going to be useful, then why wouldn't you want to see it, right? As long as you're still seeing the necessary cards for your engine. But in addition, there's search capability. So searching is great with tech cards because if you look at Magic Man in particular, he is amazing with tech cards because he has Wheel of Magic, which lets you burn 2 power, take any 2 cards from deck into hand, and shuffle. So that sets you up with finding the perfect tech card for whatever situation you run into. And a lot of the tech cards that Blue likes to play don't have high power requirements, so you don't care about burning that 2 power, and you just get to search whatever fits the situation, which is just incredibly, incredibly strong. So Wheel of Magic is amazing, and it makes Magic Man very powerful. Then there's, of course, other tech cards that you can put for searching. You can tech green cards in any deck. Cards like Gender Differences is a huge one that you'll see very often. So it's just 3 power resource, spend, lose 2 energy, take a card from your discard pile into your hand. So this will let you find any crucial card that you've already lost in battle that may be in your discard pile, and any deck can play this card, so it's a great tech, and it's a great search card to find whatever fits the situation. You can also play something like the Woodman ally here, which is just spend, take a card from your discard pile into hand. So much like Gender Differences, it has a similar effect, except you don't lose the 2 energy with Woodman, but you do have to play it on 4 power, so it's a little bit of give or take there, you know, find which one works better in your situation. So being able to tech in certain green search cards can work wonders for a deck. It can make, like, if you even play a card like Sweet Indignation, right? It's burn a power to search a card from your deck, and then you shuffle your deck. So if you have a certain net op that is crucial to your strategy, and you're not finding it consistently enough that you would like, then throw in Sweet Indignation, and you can just play this as a pseudo, you know, extra copy of that net op or that crucial card, because you can play this down and then search the card from the deck. So you can look at this as just an extra copy, which when you increase the number of copies or quantity of a certain card in your deck, the probabilities change drastically. So probability is huge when you're deck building, and certain tech cards can just be incredibly beneficial to you. So focus on your main engine, and then look at other situations that you might be weak towards, and you can tech in cards that'll help you out in those situations. Or look at the overall meta game that you expect to run into when you're playing, and find a crucial tech card that might work well against a wide variety of those decks that you expect to see. So it's huge, just consistency, and then focus on techs to round out your deck, and then you should have something very functional, and you're just going to have to try it out and see how it goes. Overall, the process of deck building is pretty much you're going to create something, right? You're going to test it out, and then you're going to notice things during testing that is going to lead to you refining the deck, and then you're just going to kind of rinse and repeat, right? So make some changes, test it out again, refine it further, keep repeating the process, and eventually you end on something really solid that you can be proud of and play to, you know, a lot of success. So it's just a super fun and rewarding process. And again, think outside the box, right? So find a Navi that you like, then check out their cards and then the different color combinations that you might be able to incorporate, and then find cool cards that fit your main strategy, and then make sure it's consistent, and then come up with tech cards that help it out in other situations. And then you've got a functional deck, and you just test and reiterate, and there you go. That is deck building in a nutshell. I know that was kind of a long explanation, but hopefully you were able to follow along and really, you know, absorb this information. And I really hope that it helps you out in your own deck building endeavors in the future. But before we end the video, I do quickly want to talk about net decking. So I mentioned net decking before, and that's just taking somebody else's deck list. So if we look at this battle-network.com and you go to the deck builder, well, if you scroll down, there are starter decks if you want to just try out and learn the game initially, and then there are public decks that people can submit as public, and anybody can view them and copy the deck. So sometimes people do write-ups on how to play the deck, which is really helpful as a new player. And then you have your deck list. So you got your Navi, and then all the battle chips first, and then events are on the left, and then all the resources are on the right, and then the quantities of each card. So if you want to just try out a deck, and then you can scroll down here and just hit copy this deck, and it'll save it into your decks. And then try it out, right? And I think a good starting point for a beginner as well is net deck something that you think looks cool. Try it out, play a couple games with it, get the general feel of it, and that's going to help you as a player in general, right? And then, even if you don't want to build your deck from the ground up, take that deck list and modify it a little bit. Find things that you didn't like about the deck, and then things that you really do like, and you can make modifications to hone in on the parts you like and change around the parts that you didn't and make it your own, right? So that can really lead to some good decks very easily. And then once you feel like you have a solid enough grasp on the game in general and deck building, and then you're able to just start the process from scratch maybe and build your own custom creation. And it's just super fun and rewarding, like I've mentioned. So try it out. I would highly recommend it. Not only can you net deck from the public lists on battle-network.com, but there is another site called Card Game Geek. So let's jump over to Card Game Geek real quick just so I can briefly show you all the cool deck lists that are on there. So here we are on Card Game Geek. I just wanted to showcase this real quick. So you can see all the different deck lists here. So you can see the Navi that the deck is for, and then the deck name, who it's created by, and what kind of deck, if it's standard or casual play or whatever it may be. But then you can see the number of views on the deck as well, and the most previous update. So I think it's sorted here by most recently updated. But there's a good handful of decks on here, so check out maybe some of them with the higher view counts. It might be more reliable, but check it out for yourself and just see how they look. So, you know, if we just look at this base Ultimate Destruction, it's got a lot of views, right, by Soulcross. So click the deck here, and it'll bring up the deck list. And shoutouts to Soul, because he does some awesome write-ups on his decks, which is really, really helpful to newer players. So that's really cool to read. But then if you scroll down, you got the actual deck list. So if you hover over, it'll pull up the card for you. So there's base, and then it sorts it by events here, and then battle chips are over here, and then you have all your resources and the different quantities for each. So it's just a really easy to digest display format here, and it's cool that you can just hover over anything and see what the cards are. And you can also even, you know, create your own deck lists on here and post them. You can create a login, and then you can save your own deck lists to the My Decks section, and you can either have them private or public. So if all these ones here are public, but you can make private lists which you don't share with anybody if you just want to, you know, kind of keep track of things yourself and try things out. But yeah, Card Game Geek, it's a great place to share deck lists, as well as the battle-network.com. So I would recommend checking this site out if you want to just see what's out there, right? Maybe it'll, even if you're not going to net deck, it might help spark some new ideas that you have based on seeing what other people like to do. So Card Game Geek, highly recommend.
All right, and there you have it. So that's deck building for the MegaMan TCG. And I hope you all found this useful, and try building your own decks and let me know how it goes. And I know I talked a bit about the net decking and whatnot, and that is a great place to start, but once you feel ready for it, just dive in and see what you can come up with. And the number one thing is, do not be afraid to innovate, because even though this is an older game and it's been out for a long time, nobody knows everything. Nobody is an expert, and we're still coming up with cool new ideas that nobody has thought of yet. And it might seem like a crazy idea at first, and maybe it'll work. You know, maybe it won't, but maybe it will. So it's worth trying. Don't let any idea just get shut down without testing it out for yourself. So innovate, 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 and see what kind of cool, crazy ideas you can come up with. I'd love to hear about them as well. So that's going to do it for this video, though. Make sure you give a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. And consider supporting me on Patreon as well. It's a lot of work to make content, and I'm trying to put out content for both Unmatched and MegaMan at the same time. So I just appreciate all the support from everybody across all platforms. And as far as more content in the future for this game, I do plan to continue, maybe with some strategy guides for the different Navis, talking about some options that they have and what they're all about, and maybe even some gameplay as well, because we are going to have another tournament starting up at the beginning of next year. So I'm really looking forward to that, and maybe I can showcase some of the gameplay for you guys to watch and enjoy. So yeah, I hope you'll stick around for all the awesome new content going to be coming up in the future. And I really hope that this video helped you guys out. And make sure you leave comments down below what you thought about this video and if it helped you, and let me know what kind of cool ideas you're coming up with yourself. And I will also leave links, of course, to the Card Game Geek website and the Battle Network website down in the description as well. So check those out if you're interested, and I hope you will jump into the game and join me here. But that's going to do it for this video, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm ZeroSkater12, and I'll see you next time.